you can understand I do yab on about this a little bit because, well, I'm doing a PhD in it basically, or was doing a PhD in it, or will in the future not be doing a PhD in it. Because this is a difficult thing. They're not here. The information systems, I'm trying to do information systems because anywhere else they won't really accept this kind of social ontology. They're just really interested in the relationships, psychology, and then they'll come up with these words in terms of these reification of terms, and then the relationship of these terms, and then do the test on the questionnaires. And, I'm not interested in that. This is the test. I call this a meta method because it doesn't define what self-discipline is. I never had to explain to kids what self-discipline was, and if anybody did ask, which I can't remember, it might have happened a couple of times, I can't even remember anybody ever asking what self-discipline was. It's not really based on the definition of self-discipline. It depends on whether the class is good. And everybody knows whether a class is good or not. Everybody knows if somebody's imposed control. It's not hard. That's easy. The trouble is we don't have academically, as adults, language to describe this. I've tried to find it. It's very difficult. Anyway, so this is a self-organizing system. It's warm data. It's contingent. It's information as action over information as knowledge. So it's about the internal states of the students. Like my students, when they were annoyed when they got all they were attributed a different state that they thought they were, but they actually, when they did the reflexive exercise, they said yes, they were responsible for the state of the class. That's very important. And so they're in each individual. Think about this. It's a complex thing. So I don't think I talk about it later, but I had to dig deep. Okay, I had to explore academia, and I found a thing called cybernetics, and this evolved by a guy called Viner in 1948, I think it was, and he first order cybernetics. And this was a great revolution because basically it talked about feedback loops. And he had been working with machines. Okay, this is before computers, but machines. And he had worked in the war with tracking systems, automatic tracking systems for guns. Wow. Okay, so cybernetics, and they started talking about biology and so on and so forth. It's about how do biological systems maintain themselves. This is related eventually to like autopoiesis. Autopoiesis. Is that correct? Autopoiesis. It could be like that. Autopoiesis. Okay? And that was by Valera and I always forget the first guy's name. Something on Valera. And it's to do with how does an organism maintain itself? How does an A-state class maintain itself? Okay, that's kind of interesting. We know how C-state class maintain themselves. It's the teacher, all right? But first order cybernetics is basically, it's kind of like C. This person's in charge of the class, and that's it. And so the students are different from that, and that's the governor. Literally the governor, and that's what cybernetics stands for. It's kybernetes, which originally Greek, the governor, or the boat steersman. Okay, steersman. However, we're interested in the 60s, 70s, second order cybernetics was developed, and the guy called Forster, and various other people. So we're talking about, and a few social anthropologists popped up, and that's why I was interested. And it was like Bateson and his wife, Mead, and they developed social, family therapy and so on and so forth. He came up with a double bind in psychology. And so second order is where you're part of the system. You're part of the system. So you're not just observing it, kind of controlling it or observing it. You're actually part of the system, okay? And you're in a feedback loop with it. And this has been significant for academia, postmodernism, and so on and so forth. However, now, over the last 10 years, third order cybernetics, they've talked about this, but they haven't really got many tools and techniques for it. And basically, you're part of it and there's nothing special about you. Okay, so it's a fully self-organized system. Okay, that's us. That's the way I operate. Okay, so you and I are equal. Okay, just because I'm talking here doesn't mean I'm in more control or charge of what's going on between us. Not at all. In fact, you have. Okay, you know, if you look at reflexive reading and so on and so forth. And it's just an extension of this. Okay, so third order cybernetics is where you're part of it. There's a guy called Lipsky, and this came out of Russia mostly, because they came up with a slightly different understanding of what cybernetics was, and that's why you hear the word cybernetics related to computers, because that's what computers are based on, this feedback system loop. So cybernetics, cybernetic systems, cyber security, that kind of thing. But they also explored the social aspects of it, so they came up with this third order cybernetics, which they also involve computers. Okay, so there's lots of ways to track where this idea came from and how it's constituted. But there's a nice description of it by a guy called Lipsky, 2015 and further, I think before. And he talks about multi-reflexive environments, or self-developing reflexive environments. Self-developing reflexive environments. That's pretty cool. Multi-reflexive environments. Self-developing. They're teenagers. They are developing. They're self-developing. But it's an environment, so it's a collective effect. That's what ABC enumerates. But it's enumerated by us, as individuals. But it affects the teacher's behavior. The teacher, specifically institutional power. This changes the role and defines the role of the teacher, the collective of the participants, the multi-reflexive environment, defines the behavior of the teacher, the role. You know that job specification, produce interesting lessons? Definitely in an A state. Don't produce so many interesting ones, we'll see. That's imposing the control. That's another part. Can control the class. Class management. Right? You see? And so this language, the structure, this data structure, this informational structure, also involves within it something about knowledge, but as action. Information is action and wisdom. There's something about wisdom in this, about internal states and the timings and so on and so forth, and sharing. It's a collective social thing. It's very interesting. Right, the closest that we've got to this is Doll's dissipative control. So in theories, I found out that the only place that I found anything close to this was this thing is do with self-organizing. Funnily enough, it's related to maths teaching, like what I did. And he came up with a system called, he came up with this term called dissipative control. And actually it's related, I haven't got it there, but if I remember correctly, it's related to Dewey. And Dewey had a description of, funnily enough, the teacher being a governor, a steerer of the ship. Okay, the students were in the ship, and that's what they were trying to do. And they were trying to do it in a way which was conducive. Okay, it wasn't like in control, it was trying to make sure that it's just helping it navigate in the right direction towards learning maths or English or history or whatever it is. So it's quite interesting, there's a correlation there. So there's some correlations going on academically, but they're all miles apart and they're not quite coming together. And most of it is based in this space of knowledge, in this space, which is all terms, as opposed to this space, which is real, and having a feedback loop or a method which is less to do with academia. Okay, so can I analyze some data that says that these classes are in B states and A states, and then refer and compare them to other classes, and then draw some kind of generalization? No, that would be your traditional first order, effectively, science. Can I transfer? Can I transfer what I've learned from this group to another group? Can I transfer the knowledge? No. Can I transfer the technique and say, oh, look, it works over here, so it'll work over there? No. Okay, so transference, which is the big problem in social sciences. It's not replication. Replication is first order problem. How do you replicate exactly the same conditions? You can't. Every class is different. Can we transfer? Again, you can't. You cannot transfer it because the knowledge, the information as knowledge is implicit, is tacit in the skills of the participants. That is just a reflection of it. How useful is that? Well, without this, that doesn't happen. Okay? But it means that these people are now equipped. So that teacher is now, oh, look, they've experienced some A's and B classes. They've somehow or other managed to help negotiate that and participate in A, B states. And that means that if that teacher goes to another school, hopefully might be able to induce A, B. Depends on the students though. So if the students are mucking about, they're like, okay, look, okay, right, we're on C state. But when they get given the opportunity to be, they go, oh, here we go, blah, 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 interesting. And it works. And they go, oh, right, the students go, oh, that's a much better way of interacting. You go, yeah, that's right. And so, or the students themselves. So if you have an A state class, you can imagine if you've got like 4 groups in a year group, 4 classes in a year group, and one of them is consistently an A state, you might say, okay, guys, what if we split you into groups? And so one group goes off to that class, one group's to that, and we split up the classes in a different way. Okay, we'll see if it works. Okay, can you influence the rest of the class? But not control. Okay, this is about sharing how it works. And maybe 5 people distributed from an A state could go into another class and help induce it get into a B state. Wow. Because once you start getting these positive experiences, kids love it. Okay, I mean, it's as simple as that. So, critical realism. Now, the reason why this is hard to introduce, I've explained some part of it, the knowledge and how it works, how it conforms with simple structures. This kind of structure is almost invisible because it's actually less about academia, and you can't, the values and judgments, the longitudinal progress of a school, a lesson, the longitudinal record of A, B, or C stuff for a class is kind of interesting, but it's really only as interesting for the participants. Is it useful for the school? Yes, it can be. Can you get an individual, could do this, a student in 7 different classes, different subjects and topics. 4 of them are A classes, 3 of them are B. Oh, okay. Another student, multiple C, and a couple of B. Oh, interesting. And so, how responsible are they for the state of that class? Okay, that involves for me some kind of clever maths, but it's not hard, cold maths based on cold data. It's maths based on relationship. And that is XQ. How do we develop mathematics that we can do on this kind of warm data? Okay, because we don't want to, we cannot generalize, we cannot really transfer because the actual experiences in the people. So we have to develop academically methods of being able to use this kind of data. So, but at this point, I can't get even my department to appreciate that this is even possible. Okay, even though I've experienced it with kids in a classroom, and I think I've justified it theoretically. There's something, so I had to go really deep. Critical realism, this thing called critical realism by a guy called Bhaskar. I'm going to put his name, I didn't put the other guy's names, but this guy Bhaskar. And he has developed a theory called critical realism, or for full, but he was ignored towards the end of his life, transcendental dialectical critical realism. And basically, he points out, ludicrous levels of fallacy and problems in our current operation of academia, specifically social sciences. And it correlates to some extent to third-order cybernetics. And he complains about, for example, there is an absence. Where is it? No, it doesn't talk about absence. Okay. One of the big problems he has about philosophy is the absence of absence. So all we've got is a positivist version of kind of history and a positivist theoretical modelling. And what you need to do to spot is the absence. I spotted this absence while I was teaching. It was to do with child-centered learning. I really love the idea of child-centered learning, but there was 30 centres. It was a social problem, and nobody talked about it in academia. In the way I got taught PGCE, it was obvious. 30 centres. That's a dynamic problem. And so this is a solution for that dynamic problem. It's not a solution, it's just a tool which might help people derive a solution in their class. You kind of get the difference. And so anyway, so this is an absence. Not only is it an absence institutionally, i.e. there is no equivalent to the simple consequence system, but there's also an absence of this in academia. Okay, because of the discipline structure. This is amazing. So, so what does this do? And in terms of Bhaskar, he talks about transformative praxis. Transformative praxis, because he does contain the individual within the system. So, you know, an anthropologist and sociologists have been trying to work out what the difference between structure, what's the relationship, and this is the common one, structure, agency, or agency structure problem. And it's been going on and on and on in philosophy and sociology for hundreds of years. And eventually these guys, Bhaskar and Archer, Margaret, I think Archer, talked about how these relate, and they talk about it being co-emergent. Structure generates agency, agency generates structure. And there's this co-emergence and a little bit more precision on that. And what this structure does is it creates the form of agency that we're used to. Pacifies people in top sets, angry people, disillusioned people in the middle, and some angry people at the bottom of this. And that's what's created in our society as well. So the structure of this consequence system creates the conditions of agency. Okay? Whereas this goes, wait, let's put the agency in there. This is a very minimal structure, which also contains within it the consequence system. Okay, so it has that too, so people have this place for it. But it also gives enough flexibility for social learning to occur. And transformative praxis. And that's the big term that I want to make use of. Transformative, because that's always good. Transformation. Praxis. That means practice. Practice. Transformative praxis, the A, B, or C, changes and defines the behavior of the teacher, the specific role of the teacher in the institution. So this transformative praxis, if kids manage to get an A state, it is defining the role of the teacher, or it should be. That's what we're trying to indicate. And therefore, it is changing education. And if they can change education, the hierarchy, then when they become adults, they'll be able to organize themselves in ways that do not rely on hierarchy. And that's what Sqale does, that economic tool that I've developed, so that as these kids grow, they will not have to fall into the hierarchies of control. They can actually operate more like an A state class in the real world. That's what I'm encouraging us to do. Right, so it's pretty deep. It's all very interesting. What's the mathematics of this? There's another thing that we could actually do. I haven't talked about it much, but it's okay. Before I just do that, let's just finish off this. The objectives. The objectives. Here are the objectives of my PhD. Show the effective intervention of student behaviour using data collected. So basically, attitude for learning. So all I'm simply going to do was do a test. My supervisors thought this was reductive. And I was like, no, it's not reductive, because this is a very odd thing. If you don't understand this thing, what I'm about to say doesn't make any sense. But what we do is we do a bit of ours there. We do a test. Okay. To test, we collect some data. Here, you give them the ABC intervention. You say, right, guys, this is the ABC intervention. A, B, C, A, B. And you record this, and the teachers record this. And they record any thoughts and so on and so forth that they might have. And then you do like a test, well, not a test, then you do get more data. So the data that we can collect is the behaviour. Literally the C1, C2, C3s. Start a test, we say, how much over a period, how much over this period? Was there a change in the actual numbers of C1, C2, C3s? What was the actual behavioural experience by the teacher recording any of this? Was there a change? Can we, okay, sorry. Good. So that's what we're doing, qualitative feedback and ABCC. I thought about other things as well, but let's just stick with that. I mean, I actually thought it'd be useful to get a questionnaire here, questionnaire there, so that the students think that's the questionnaire, that's the research. Then they do this thing, they don't think that's the research. And then you give them a question at the end, get a bit more qualitative feedback, and they think it's something to do with the actual questionnaires. And the stuff that happened in between is not really, because what we found out is that as soon as you do research on people, everybody's like, oh, a bit more switched on. Therefore, the data that's collected is conditional on the fact that the amount of attention that's been put on them. Of course, because they're sensitive human beings, which makes all the psychology, nearly all the data that's coming out of psychology in sociology, in social context, biased. Okay? Because people are asking, and the reflexive condition, what they think, is different from what they actually do. Right? That's what the ABC state. It's actually what people do in classes. Well, it's an evaluation, of course, of the state, but the state itself, the social ontological state of the class, as defined by this, means that you get different experiential states of social existence. This state is a very different quality when you walk into a class that's a C state than an A state. Both respectful, if it's a C plus or an A, you will notice the difference. Now, we might not be able to find those differences. Academia can try, but quite frankly, it's a qualitative thing that we bring. Right. So we test this. We get some data. You also get this thing called attitude for learning. Teachers, basically, nearly all schools that I've gone to have a kind of evaluation by the teacher. It's usually numeric. 1 means they're really loving it, they're really working and putting in the effort. Down to 4, they're not putting in the effort, they're not switched on to learning this subject. Okay, 1 to 4. And you say, right, check that, and then you ask the teacher, what do you think? Is it different? Might be different. But more importantly, you've got this data in TWE, this qualitative data it's called. The qualitative data in our current structure of academia means we analyse the buggery out of it, and it's relative to all the terms that we have, reification, all this kind of stuff. Whereas this is trying to inform why is an A, B, or C class. You know, if we had a few A classes, why? Do you know why? And maybe they'll have some guesses. And so what you're doing is you're trying to, that warm data, that indicator ABC is indicating something's going on, and the warm data is kind of brought out a little bit more of the qualitative feedback as to who they think certain people, and they might have learned something about different students and behaviours, or themselves, okay, as teachers. Quite interesting, rich stuff. 2 is transformational practice through collective result through, okay, so what is this longitudinal? What's the data? Did it actually shift? Did it go from A, B, C, A, B, A, B? Oh, wow. So there was a shift. You're no longer getting C classes. Is that right? You're like, yeah. Right. Optionally provide evidence of whether minimal intervention is sufficient. So does this by itself, and the way I just described it, is that it? Is that all that's required? Or do you need to have an expert in there? Do you need to have a little bit of explanation? Do you need to have some reflexive exercises? Or do you need specifically an individual who is doing ABC in every class? Okay, so you have the subject specialist, and then you have somebody, like in year 7s, following that class, like a school class teacher, helping that class self-organise. And once that class self-organises well with various techniques to help them, you step away. Okay, and it's a self-organising A state, you step away. And presumably you want to try and do that within weeks, if not months. By Christmas, the year 7 class is maintaining its A state. And that means that that specialist can go off to other parts of the school and help out with classes that are collapsing into C states, trying to help them. So do we need experts in this and the philosophy and the practices in this? Or is that minimally sufficient to marry itself to the consequent system? Okay? So that's what the PhD hopefully will be able to maybe give us a little bit of insight into. Framing ABC state as a kind of iterative, self-enclosed action research. So in terms of theory, we can say, right, what is this for? Well, it's actually it's a meta method. This Bhaskar critical realism is called meta theory because it's above theories. It's to do with social ontologies beyond our epistemology. Whatever we think is going on, actually what is going on. So this is a meta method. It's a method that sits on top of our experience. In this case, ABC, the kids in a classroom. I actually had to develop reflexive reading for academics to try to help them understand that they are practicing something. It's not just theory, okay, and they have lenses and everything else. No, they're part of this. They're part of this. They're part of this educational philosophy and practices that are going in schools, and ineffective. They have to accept they've been ineffective in influencing how schools are going. Got loads and loads of theory, loads and loads of evidence indicating many different ways of going forwards in education, and for some reason or other, it's not being implemented in schools. Why? It collapses down to this thing. Okay? And it marries this idea of information and just sending kids. Information as knowledge. Okay? But we know about all this stuff to do with relationships. We know how important collaboration is, but it always gets stuck in performative mode. That's another person. Can't remember her name. Not Mead. Could be Hayes, I'm not sure. Howes, 2010. It's stuck in performative mode rather than collaboration. Okay, Johnson & Johnson, all the way back to a guy called Deutsch and collaboration, cooperation theory, and 1940 something, and we're still stuck at this level of just performing because of the hierarchy, because of the knowledge and the reinforcing systems. So we have to change not just this system, look at the other systems I've suggested in order to improve the whole system. So this ABC and the A state fits into other systems, okay, of social organisation that are possible as adults. How do we do that though? If I'm just doing this in education, well, this theory is a meta-method. It's a meta-method for Bhaskar's meta-theory, which is based on, which is talking about things like transformative praxis. This meta-method helps people achieve transformative praxis. It itself is a form of transformative praxis because it defines the role of the teacher, in effect. Defines, not verbally, defines according to the behaviour of the students. It's beautiful. By framing ABC, right, so we're basically empowering academia, and hopefully by doing this kind of thing we start saying, wait a minute, academia, you're kind of doing things, social science, in a way which we can move forwards. And then we're also contributing to the co-emergence of agency structure debate by establishing a theoretical basis for relationality. Wow. A reflexive condition. Okay, so basically we're trying to come up with data, ABC, that refers to this structure, agency, relationship. Agency, individual, structure, words, institutions, order. What you hear would be the structure. What agency is whatever it is and how you understand that and the meaning and your reflexive state and the result of what you will do at the end of this video. Okay, so the structure is kind of like a fixed thing. Even in psychology, you have structures, dispositions, Bourdieu. So you like this, you don't like that. All these things are kind of structures. So there's aspects of everything that's going on which is structural, and there's aspects of this which is more fluid, or we have this kind of conscious choice about what we're doing. And that's the bit that's kind of more to do with agency. But even within agency, as I say, we've got like subtle, structural, psychological kind of constructs. And that's also what we're playing around with. I haven't done it yet, but that's kind of more to do with the kind of religious space. But in academia, we can definitely approach this philosophically. Okay, and if you look at what Bhaskar does towards the end of his life, he actually derives proof, he thinks, of God. Okay, this is an academic who starts with science, goes into social science. Towards the end of his life, he's sitting there saying, "Oh look, self. Oh look, God. I think we can socially justify God. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. That's Bhaskar, but I can definitely say this is reasonable." We can definitely construct something. This helps us move, gives a bit more definition of structure agency argument. The argument that's happening, the debate about using information system, multi-reflexive, third order cybernetics, multi-reflexive environments, and multi-agent modeling, but instead of being on things, it's on us, our intentionality. I'll deal with that just in a second if we've got any time. I don't think we're going to have any time. But number 6, improve relations between education and university. So basically, if you start getting A classes are more responsive to experimentation, playing around, and metacognition, and you can start doing activities. And so they might invite people at university to come into their schools to conduct research, or undergraduates to just apply some of the research of learning and so on and so forth, accelerated learning techniques. And the kids basically try them out, and if they find that they're useful, great, and if they don't, they say rubbish. But the point is there's this rather exciting involvement of university and academics in improving. I mean, really accelerating learning, which we've proven. It's just that we haven't practiced. And so instead of producing some papers and then the practitioners just have to implement these things, is we get university involved a lot more. They're actually inviting new research, but also implementing research that's already been discovered. Right, that's good enough for me. Okay, and so that's what my PhD is meant to be, just to establish whether this actually works, basically. Is it useful? Self-regulated learning, information, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's good enough. I'm just going to finish off. I think this is going to finish. I'll just switch this one off. I haven't made use of that. I think I'm going to switch that off. Only last little bit is multi-agent modelling. I've mentioned it. Mathematics of intentionality. I think I'm just going to mention it. It's out with this framework. But if we're talking about education, any kind of education, and in fact most of the other things, I'll probably relate it. Hopefully I'll see if I can, when I'm doing all 7 systems, not exclusive, they're not exclusive systems, they're just different aspects, and one of them is this education, and specifically this tool, but there are other aspects of education which I haven't gone into, which I might, but you can read some of them in the booklets that I've produced. It's to do with multi-agent modelling. I'm very interested in the relationship of a collective of people moving forward together, like swarming, and the mathematics of that. And just to leave you with this is money. The current system that we have is money in adults, but it's because it's a scalar, it's treated as this. It's got quantity and it aggregates, and so we get capital. However, if we treat money as a vector, it has intentionality. It indicates intentionality, and there is movement, and we change the social contract around money as a vector. So we're not just using it as exchange, but we're using it to share things and to draw attention to and awareness and values. If we do that, which is what Sqale does, it means that we potentially have a mathematical basis for modelling. Okay, it's a bit tricky this, modelling intentionality and social cohesion. So this is a bit of data to indicate to a teacher what state they should be going into, what state of class they should be expecting when they go in to see that class. So it's predictive and determining. So similarly, can you do that collectively? Okay, so if a class is an A state, what does that mean about their intentionality and their motive, their intentionality in achieving certain objectives? Is it to get grades? Is it to become somebody in the future? Is it to be a good person? Is it to comply and be nice, just play along with the teacher? Is it to actually learn something? Is it to allow other people to learn stuff? They're not that interested. Is it to be a good son or daughter to their parents? Is it to, what's their intentionality and how that aligns with multiple intentionalities in a classroom? Can we do maths on that? Not to model it. We can't, any kind of model of a bunch of people in a room anywhere, or us, is limited. It's whether that modeling system helps us individually understand where we are more. So mathematics itself becomes a reflexive thing. It's not control, like the ABC. It's not really control. It's just about helping us understand, and it changes our behavior so that when we interact with these kids or other group of adults. So if I went into a university department and it was like a B state, I'd be like, oh, good. If it was a C state, I'd be like, oh, okay. And I'm definitely in a department which is like a C state. It could be that academia is mostly like a C state. But I think there are departments that are more like A states. So if anybody sees this and thinks, oh, this is interesting, if you're a teacher, you want to adopt this, go ahead, go to the site, abc.com, abcstate.com, download the material and start using ABC State. I mean, you basically got it, but there's a bit more information on that. If you want to look at the academic paper, go ahead. If you're a head teacher, you want to invite us into the school, fine. I'm happy to share what I know. And if you're an academic and you're in a department that you go, this is interesting, David, come over, speak, I would love to. I would love to. Because I won't be able to pursue this any further. Okay, because the department that I'm in is not interested. And they've made that clear. So, why? Well, I've gone into it. Okay, so, yeah, get in contact. Otherwise, right, whew, gosh, that was me yapping for this for a long time. Thank you very much for paying attention for this far, and good luck. Okay, I can suspect the only people interested in watching this are people that have actually tried to start using this. Maybe, oh, who came up with this? In which case, I'm very interested in hearing what you've actually come up with. That's probably the best way of thinking about this. That, you know, you've actually got stuff to tell me, and you've got ways of moving this forwards, academically or in practice, or both. Okay, so it's up to you. Okay, so enjoy, and good luck.